June 5th, 1944, Nazi Germany had overtaken Europe. Poland had fallen. France followed suit. Britain's freedom was hanging by a thread. And what happened over the next 36 hours would determine the fate not just of Britain, but of all of Europe and the Western world. At 9:30 p.m., the 101st Airborne, known as the Tip of the Spear, took off from Britain to be the first paratroopers on the ground in Normandy as part of the largest invasion in history. We know it as D-Day. Amongst the 101st Airborne were two paratroopers, Robert Wright and Kenneth were two medics. Like most paratroopers, they were misdropped. Like most medics, they lost the bulk of their gear, only landing with what was on their belts with them. They found themselves, when they landed on the ground in the town of Angoville, France, not a strategic foothold, but very quickly, Germans found Americans, Americans found Germans, and fighting broke out. One of the medics later said, "There's no substitute for hearing a bullet go by your ear for the first time." Robert Wright very quickly stumbled onto a 900-year-old church building. It was a small one-room church, just lined with a very small number of pews. But when he entered it, he realized this would be the perfect aid station for what we're about to encounter. So he took the Red Cross flag out of his gear. He hung it on the door as a signal to troops on both sides of the war. This is an aid station. Moore, meanwhile, found a wheelbarrow and proceeded to go to the fields that surrounded them, find soldiers who had been shot or otherwise injured, load them into the wheelbarrow, take them back to the church where they would load them onto a pew, and they would take turns working on them and continuing to bring in more and more soldiers. They put the most critically injured soldiers at the front of the church near the altar to keep them sequestered. Very quickly, the church fills up. By just a few hours after they had landed, some 80 soldiers are packing the church, getting their wounds attended to. And the night is anything but uneventful. At one point, a bomb falls through the roof of the church. Everybody freezes. It cracks the stone floor, but it doesn't go off. It's a dud. Just to be safe, they throw it outside anyway. At another point, a German soldier bursts through the door with his machine gun, but when he sees what they're doing, he crosses himself and leaves. At another point, when the area surrounding the church was under German control, 3 German officers walk in, but when they see that the medics are tending to soldiers from both armies without regard, without discriminating between uniform, they promise to send a doctor as soon as they are able. Moore and Wright treat some 80 soldiers that night. They both receive the Silver Star for what they do. But very quickly, about 36 hours later, the fighting moves on to more strategic footholds that you've seen in Band of Brothers and things like that. What strikes me about this story is not simply how amazing it was on D-Day, but really what happened after the war there. Because when the people of Angoville, France were literally rebuilding their lives after the war, they were rebuilding their homes and their places of work, but then they came to the church and they fixed the hole in the roof from the dud bomb. They replaced all the stained glass because it had all been shot out. In fact, if you go there today, a couple of the stained glass windows are of paratroopers, reminding what happened on D-Day. What strikes me most about this church, though, is the pews. Because on D-Day, as they treated these soldiers, as you can imagine, the soldiers were bleeding, so blood got on multiple of the pews. But when the people of Angoville saw them, they did not do what I would do if I was in charge of reconstructing that church. Because nobody who comes to church wants to sit on a bloody pew. That's kind of disgusting. I would have said, take out those pews, put in new pews, or sand those down and stain them so they look new. What the people of Angoville did was something entirely different, and it still gives me chills to this day. They said this church was constructed 900 years ago to be a place of hope and healing for those who are broken and hurting. And on D-Day, it lived out its mission. That's what happened here on D-Day. So we will preserve, they said, the blood-stained pews. We will keep the blood-stained pews as a reminder of what happened here on D-Day, that it did not matter what ethnicity you were, what age you were, it did not matter who you were shooting or who shot you. You are welcome here, and you are gonna find hope and healing from those who could give it. And what I took away from that is I thought that's the best picture of church I've ever seen. That this church, any church, the capital C, worldwide church, should be a church, metaphorically, of bloodstained pews. That it does not matter what has happened to you, but the broken and hurting and lost can come and find grace and truth to set you free and join the mission of fighting against evil to save souls through the power of Jesus.